None of them drew their weapons. And yet, every enemy lay dead. No screams. No orders. Just darkness. And then, silence. In a galaxy where power is worshipped. Where the front rows are claimed by warlords and conquerors. The humans always sat in the back. Always silent. Always watching. Always waiting. The strongest species called it weakness. Laziness. Cowardice. But then, they saw something no one could explain. Something that froze the battlefield. And changed the way they looked at humans forever. As blood spilled and bodies dropped, the warriors who believed they ruled the galaxy could only watch. One asked, "What did you do?" The human replied, "We sat in the back." That wasn't an explanation. It was a warning. And if you think you already understand humanity, think again. Because what you're about to hear is only the beginning. The diplomatic transport glided silently through deep space, carrying delegates from every major species in the galaxy. Inside, rows of metallic seats lined the walls. Sturdy, reinforced, built to hold even the largest of war-born bodies. At the front sat the VCK, towering reptilian warlords. Heavy armor, cold eyes. They shifted in their seats, restless, radiating tension. Behind them were the Gari, thick-shelled, lumbering beasts. Their carapaces scraped loudly against the walls with every movement. Further back sat the Zola, tall, jointed, graceful in an unsettling way. They spoke in rapid clicks and hisses, always calculating. And at the very end, in the last row, sat the humans. They slouched in their seats, arms crossed, heads tilted back like they had nothing in the universe to worry about. No weapons drawn. No armor plates. Just quiet. Garval, a VCK commander with crimson eyes and 100 scars, watched them from the front. He wasn't just annoyed. He was insulted. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Concord for 2 decades. Yet they carried themselves like veterans of 1,000 wars. Always in the back. Always watching. So casual. So arrogant. To Garval, it looked like weakness. Like prey. He turned, his voice low and sharp. "Is it cowardice that keeps you in the back, human?" The human he addressed, Sergeant Nolan, opened one eye. He didn't straighten up. He didn't respond with offense. He simply exhaled through his nose and said, "Just habit." Garval sneered. "I've seen prey act as you do. Hiding in corners. Avoiding the strong. But you claim to be warriors. Are you not?" Nolan smirked slightly, eyes calm. "You really don't know us at all, do you?" As Zola nearby hissed in amusement. The Drari didn't laugh, they rarely did. But their gaze flicked toward the humans with a hint of curiosity. Garval clenched his jaw. His claws tapped impatiently on the armrest. Then, the transport jolted. Lights flickered. A strange pressure filled the air. The ship was docking. But something was wrong. Suddenly, silence. Unnatural. Heavy. Then, a sound. Metal twisting. Screaming under pressure. A sound no warrior ever wants to hear. Garval stood up, voice like thunder. Ambush. The force threw bodies across the cabin. Seats ripped from the floor. Garval crashed into the far wall. Another explosion tore open the side of the ship. Enemy troops swarmed in. Not pirates. Not raiders. Soldiers. Organized. Brutal. Efficient. Plasma fire lit the air. The VCK fought. The Drari roared. The Zola struck with precision. But there were too many. Garval clawed one enemy down. But when he turned back, the humans were gone. Their seats were empty. Then, movement. Fast. Silent. Sharp. A hiss. A blade cutting through air. A choked scream. Another. Then. Nothing. The bay was soaked in red light. The enemy? Gone. No. They were still there. On the floor. Dead. All of them. Weapons still in hand. No signs of struggle. And at the edge of the bay, just beyond the bodies, stood the humans. Unharmed. Unshaken. Their weapons still holstered. Their faces unreadable. Garval's heart pounded. He took a step forward, voice cracking. "What did you do?" Sergeant Nolan, calm as ever, finally answered. "We sat in the back. The lights were dim. Red. Flashing in pulses across the ruined docking bay. The air stank of plasma, smoke, and fear. Alien bodies lay broken across the floor. Enemies and allies alike. Some groaned. Others were still. But all eyes were fixed on one thing. The humans. They stood quietly at the far edge of the room. Just beyond the bodies. Exactly where they had been before it all began. Still. Calm. Not a single scratch. Their weapons were untouched. Their armor unmarked. And that was what made it so terrifying. They hadn't needed to fight. They hadn't even moved, until it was already over. Garval stepped forward. Each step heavy. Not from pain, but from something far worse. Uncertainty. He stared at the human sergeant. "What did you do?" Nolan didn't look at him. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't justify anything. He simply replied. "We sat in the back." It wasn't an answer. But somehow, everyone in the room understood. The Drari warriors said nothing. For once, their pride had no words. The Zola stopped calculating. Even their logic had reached a dead end. Some tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, they all realized the same thing. This wasn't bravery. This wasn't skill. This was something else. Something colder. Something older. Survival, perfected. Garval looked at Nolan again. Really looked. And for the first time in his long warrior life, he felt something strange. Not rage. Not hatred. Respect. No. Fear. Because now he knew. Humans didn't sit in the back because they were weak. They sat there because they were waiting. And when they stood up, nothing survived. The docking bay was silent after the first attack. The enemy lay scattered across the floor. Not a single one had managed to fire their weapon. The air was still thick with the smell of plasma and scorched metal. Smoke drifted through broken lights. Everyone stared in one direction. Toward the ones who had never moved. The humans. They stood there, untouched. Not a scratch on their uniforms. Not a single weapon drawn. No heavy breathing. No fear. Then, the alarm rang again. Louder this time. From the far corridor, footsteps. Heavy. Precise. Dozens of them. A second wave was coming. But this time, it wasn't pirates. It wasn't chaos. It was a force. Organized. Armed. Prepared to kill. The alien warriors took their positions, swords drawn, shields raised. Every species was ready for a fight. Except the humans. They didn't move. They didn't react. Garval, the VCK war commander, growled at the human leader. "You knew they were coming. Why didn't you warn us?" Nolan looked at him, his face unreadable. "Because we don't fight for honor. We fight to win." Then the doors burst open. The enemy stormed and shouting, firing. Bolts of plasma lit up the bay. And that's when the humans began to move. Not with panic. Not with noise. Just precision. One soldier shifted his stance just slightly. A blast missed him by inches. He returned fire, one shot, one kill. Another vanished into the shadows, only to appear behind enemy lines and take down 3 before they could scream. No orders were given. No one hesitated. They didn't fight like warriors. They moved like a program executing a task. The other species tried to join the fight. They rushed forward. But they were too late. By the time they arrived, the humans had already ended it. Garval stood frozen, claws clenched, but there were no enemies left. He turned to Nolan, who was calmly walking past the fallen, not even glancing down at them. Garval whispered, "You fight differently." Nolan didn't even turn around. "We fight to win." That was the moment they all understood. Humans didn't sit in the back because they were weak. They sat there because it gave them the best view of everything. And when they stood up, it was already too late. The battle in the docking bay was over. But the mission wasn't. Beyond the shattered doors and fallen enemies, one last target remained. The command center of the orbital station. The VCK warriors took the lead this time. They flexed their claws, armored bodies tense. The Drari raised their shields, marching in formation. The Zola slid into the flanks, calculating angles, checking lines of fire. Everyone was preparing for the final fight. Everyone. Except the humans. They stayed at the back. Just like before. Silent. Watching. Garval felt it again. That unease crawling up his spine. It wasn't the enemy ahead that made him sweat. It was the quiet footsteps behind him. The corridor opened into a massive control hall. And what stood between them and victory was a fortress. Heavy turrets lined the walls. Automated sentries buzzed with power. A full squad of elite enforcers took position behind reinforced barriers. The enemy was ready. Trained. Determined. This would be the hardest battle yet. Garval growled low, preparing to charge. The Drari braced. The Zola tightened their grip. They were ready to give everything. And the humans? They didn't flinch. Nolan simply looked at his team. Calm, quiet. And said just 3 words. Time to clean up. Music rises. Tension peaks. What happened next? Garval would remember for the rest of his life. The humans moved. Not like berserkers. Not like prey. But like ghosts. Every motion was deliberate. Every step had purpose. They advanced with no hesitation. No fear. Before the first turret could even fire, it exploded. The second jammed after one short burst. One human disappeared into the shadows. And moments later, half the defenders fell without a sound. Their throats were slit. Their weapons still untouched. Some never even saw their killers coming. Garval charged forward with his unit. But there was no one left to fight. By the time they reached the enemy line, the battle was already over. The control room door slid open with a hiss. Inside stood a high-ranking enemy officer. Weapon drawn. Hands shaking. Eyes wide. He shouted, "Stop! You don't understand." Nolan raised one hand. No rush. No rage. Just finality. Too late. Silence. No one moved. No one cheered. It was over. Just like that. Garval stared at the human commander. His throat tight with something he'd never felt before. Not fear. Not hate. But recognition. "You," he said. "You don't fight like the rest of us." Nolan met his gaze, eyes calm. "We fight to win." The war was over. But the silence that followed was louder than any explosion. No celebration. No shouting. No songs of glory. The humans didn't speak of victory. They didn't even look back. They had completed the mission and walked away. Garval sat alone in his quarters, the battle replaying in his mind, frame by frame. Every movement, every decision, every moment when the humans chose not to act until it was absolutely necessary. And when they did, it was over before anyone else could even react. It wasn't their weapons that unsettled him. It wasn't their speed. It wasn't even the efficiency of their strikes. It was something far worse. They had known how the battle would end before it even began. Then, a message. A summons from the VCK High Council. Of course, they had questions. They wanted answers. But Garval had none. The chamber was vast, cold, ancient. The elders sat in a row, scarred, battle-worn, wise, and now, unsure. The High Chancellor rose. "We've read your report. We've spoken with the Drari and the Zola leaders. Tell us, Garval, do you believe humanity is a threat?" Silence. Garval's claws flexed at his sides. He wanted to say yes, to warn them. But what he had seen wasn't a threat. It was something more terrifying. "No," Garval said quietly. "They are not a threat. They are a warning." The air grew still. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Garval took a breath. He had never said these words out loud. The humans fight as if they've already seen the end of the war. They don't seek conquest. They don't revel in battle. They fight with purpose, with finality. It's not about power or pride. For them, it's survival. The Chancellor leaned forward. "And what does that mean for us?" Garval met his gaze. His voice was steady now, but beneath it, a quiet dread. "It means that if we ever force them into a real war, they will end it before we even know it has begun." Across the stars, other leaders were asking the same questions. Other war councils reviewing the same footage. Some tried to predict human strategy, only to discover it was impossible. Others strengthened their defenses, then wondered if walls would matter at all against a species that didn't need to breach them, because they'd already been inside. For the first time in generations, the strongest species in the galaxy began to question what strength truly meant, and what it truly meant to fight a human. History remembers battles. It remembers who won and who fell. It remembers explosions and names carved into stone. But this time, history had nothing to write. No human names were recorded. No medals were awarded. No songs were sung. Only silence and a memory. A whisper that now echoes through every council hall, every war room, every fortress. They sat in the back. The VCK still train. The Drari still build walls. The Zola still run simulations. But deep down, they all know they are not preparing for war. They are preparing for humans. Because the truth is no longer hidden. Humanity doesn't march at the front. They don't roar or threaten. They don't need to. They sit in the back and watch. And when they finally stand, the galaxy holds its breath. Garval once believed he understood war. He thought strength was in the roar, in blazing weapons, in blood spilled on the front lines. But that night, those beliefs were shattered by a group who never stood first. By those who always sat at the back, the ones the galaxy once dismissed as weak. They didn't lead. They didn't fire first. They didn't want medals, or even to be remembered. They waited. And when they finally moved, the battle had already ended before it began. Why do your kind always sit in the back? Garval asked. Nolan simply smiled. Because that's where the survivors sit. It wasn't just a tactic. It was a warning. Now, war councils across the stars no longer ask how to defeat humans. They ask how to survive if we ever provoke them. Because humans don't fight to win. They fight to end. And if one day they are truly pushed into a corner, war will no longer be war. It will be annihilation, merciless, without warning. And the galaxy will be left with one haunting question. Why didn't we see it coming?